I wanted to take a step to into a part of our conversation we had in our pre-call, that you said some of these main risk factors that you found for suicide in a lot of men had to do with 3Ds. And I was hoping you could explain to us a little bit about what you've found, and to kind of shine a light of what maybe we can try to notice through other people, and maybe lend a hand.
So one of our studies we did was a big synthesis of 20 years worth of research into male suicide. So we got 78 papers that have been written on male suicide, and we explored them for sort of common patterns in relation to risk factors and recovery factors. And in terms of the risk factors, we developed a model called the 3D risk, which is around how cultural norms of masculinity seem to impact what we call denial, disconnection, and dysregulation in 3 psychological domains. So denial, disconnection, and dysregulation. And the interaction of the harms of those disconnection and dysregulation in those 3 psychological domains seem to interact and increase men's suicidal pain. So the first psychological domain was around men's emotions. So how men, the cultural norms around men denying their emotions, for some men then becoming disconnected from their feelings. So not even knowing for themselves necessarily what they're feeling, because they become sort of so shut down to it. Then also impacting or minimizing their ability to feel safe in expressing those emotions, which can be an important tool for regulating feelings, to be able to understand for yourself what's going on, and then also communicating that to people that may need to know. So then we start to see some dysregulation emerging. And as pain in life builds, certain men looking for pain relief strategies. And if the pain relief strategies of expressing your emotions have been closed off to you, and pain relief strategies of, sort of intimate connection with other people have been closed off to for you, then some of the men were sort of looking for alternative strategies such as drinking, drugs, gambling, sex, self-harm. These things, behaviors were described as creating short-term relief for pain, but obviously over the long term can just end up elevating that pain and causing more of this sort of dysregulation.
Right.
So that was some of the things that we saw happening in the domain of emotions. The second area was around men's thoughts and feelings towards themselves. So things that we've discussed already in this call around ideas of failure. So men having this really strong sense of what it means to be a successful man, and a strong sense of knowing whether they were achieving that or not, and how catastrophic for some men these feelings of failure could be if they felt they weren't achieving those markers. And it could be in all different domains, so like job, finance, sex and relationships, exams, different areas of life, but the same sort of pattern of feeling like you weren't living up to expectations, and this sort of these painful ideas and feelings of self that then come as a consequence. And then there's sort of disconnection that some men do from their selfhoods and the authentic self by presenting it to the world, this external self of somebody coping and happy and functioning. Right. And so that sort of dysregulation that can then come into the relationship that you have with yourself. And in both the domains of emotions and self, we would also see how experiences in childhood could additionally elevate risk in those areas. So if you grow up in a context where there's a lot of abuse or neglect or bullying or violence, it's going to shape potentially from a young age how you regulate your emotions and your thoughts and feelings about yourself. And then the third psychological domain was around men's relationship needs. So you've got emotions, thoughts and feelings of self, and then men's relationships with others, and how cultural norms potentially deny and diminish some men's relationship needs. Right. So cultural norms that you need to suppress your emotions cultural norms about you need to be independent and stay in control. All of those norms can impact then how you relate to other people. They can impact and narrow the spaces for intimate connection. If I'm being culturally told to not share my feelings, it puts, it diminishes and narrows the space that I have to build kind of potential intimate connection with other people. The same around, these ideas of independence and self-reliance. And I'm not saying that there aren't also important qualities in those ideas, but when taken to an extreme, it can become potentially unhealthy. And so we saw here evidence of men feeling, as we've spoken about already, like incredible isolation, incredible loneliness, experiencing challenges in their relationships, challenges, relationship breakdowns, trust issues.
Right.
And so there's sort of dysregulation emerging then in this psychological domain of connection with others. So that's a kind of 3D model. So denial, disconnection, dysregulation in the psychological domain of emotions, thoughts and feelings of self, and connections with others, and how those things interact. If I feel like a failure, and I'm then being told to suppress those emotions, it's then creating even more distance from my relationship with other people. So it's not
Right.
that those three things are necessarily acting in isolation. And our hypothesis is that those three psychological domains and that sort of 3D disconnect, denial, disconnect, and dysregulation is potentially active in suicidal crisis, irrespective of your gender. That somehow that those are the potentially three core psychological tectonic plates that when
Right.
they are shifting in that dysregulated way can cause a potential sort of suicidal earthquake. But what we hypothesize is because of the way that men are socialized in certain cultures, they inherit more cultural harm, more cultural risk because of cultural norms about masculinity relating to those
Hmm.
um, three domains. Now,
Right.
also, of course, there will be biological factors that are contributing to this. I'm not saying that this model explains everything, but for us, we think that's potentially a useful framework for understanding how culture and gendered ideas may elevate some men's risk. So
Right.
I think it's really important to be reflecting on how do I regulate my emotions? How do I regulate my thoughts and feelings of self? Where do my ideas of success and failure come from? And do I really believe in those ideas? Do they really have meaningful value for me as an individual? Or is it what I feel is expected of me? What space is there in my relationships to be like intimately and meaningfully known? How can I cultivate those spaces where there's more, opportunity for that? And also for us in relation to people that may be in suicidal crisis, how we are also reciprocating the invitation for that emotional sharing,
Right.
grounding somebody in a sense of value about who they are, creating space for intimate connection. And it's not always, these things can't happen overnight, like
Yeah.
I um I had really high emotional suppression for a long period of my life. And when I first went into therapy, I remember saying to my therapist, and I was sort of 30 at the time, I was like, I feel like I'm using the muscles in my throat for the first time. It's like I'm learning to speak. And I
Right.
had to build my language of emotional fluency, like bit by bit. It wasn't that, like, and I think there's a danger in these conversations that sometimes we may mythologize women's emotionality as if they're the sort of gold standard of, but a lot of women, myself included, have a lot of work to do still about how we regulate our own emotions as well.